Yo, what's going on everyone? And in today's video, we're going to be diving into 10 tips for Joust that'll help you win more games in SMITE 2. Now these tips come straight from the most common mistakes I see players make all the time. And trust me, some of you are definitely guilty of a few. Now if you've seen my older SMITE 1 videos, a few of these may sound familiar, but don't worry, I've added 5 new tips that I've never covered before, and they're going to give you that extra edge your team needs. If you enjoy this kind of content and want to keep improving in SMITE 2, make sure to drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comment section down below what tip helped you the most. Alright, no more delays, let's get into it.
What's love got to do with it? What's love got to do with it?
Alright, coming in to tip number 1 is saving the wave. Now minion waves in Joust are the single largest, most reliable source of XP and gold. If you clear alone while the rest of your team is coming back from buying items, you're siphoning a bunch of gold and XP from them roughly every 30 seconds. Now this can turn into item leads by mid-game and forces uneven fights you can't actually take because you're the only one fed while your team is down levels. Additionally, along the same vein, make sure you try to get every wave. As I said earlier, the wave is the most consistent, largest source of XP and gold. So if you can help it, try to get every wave you can. Tip number 2, prioritizing farm. Now similar to saving the wave and making sure you get the wave, prioritizing buff camp farm is also very important. Even though it's a pretty small map with not a lot of farm, making sure to get as many as you can on cooldown will give eventual and meaningful gains. Over time, the team who keeps getting buffs on cooldown basically gets passive gold and extra XP, which means a higher level lead and getting more items much quicker. Now if you hypothetically leave camps on the map for a long period of time, you lose out on min-maxing your gold and XP, as the cooldown rate for the buff obviously only starts after you complete the camp. This may seem like an intuitive tip, but I can't tell you how many times people will leave a buff camp on the map just to stare at the enemy team in the mid lane. So make sure you get your buff camps. Tip number 3 is warding up. Now it's very important that you ward up. Even with it being a smaller map, like I said before, it is still very good for 1 or 2 players to get some wards for the Lost Knight or even the small grassy area. As in SMITE 1, this wasn't a thing. And let me tell you, I have been ganked and lost games due to the enemy team waiting for an ambush, and vice versa with my team, where we've gotten picks from waiting in the bushes. Also, sentry warding in specific will be very important, as this detects and allows you to get rid of the enemy wards. On top of that, this can force your enemy to pick up vision, meaning they'll need to pick up a sentry to counter yours. Vision wins games, and for some reason, from personal experience, wards are picked up in Joust far less than in SMITE 2 than in SMITE 1. So make sure you pick up some wards and see where your enemies are. Moving into tip number 4, we have mastering the Lost Knight. Now we have the main and only objective on the map known as the Lost Knight, which is very similar to the Bull Demon King in SMITE 1 if you guys remember. With Lost Knight being an easier to kill objective than the Bull Demon King in SMITE 1, with better effects too, which we'll go over later, prioritizing this can easily allow you to snowball and win games. Additionally, the Lost Knight is super easy to kill early game, so don't be afraid of taking it early on in the game, especially if the enemy team is tower sitting. One thing to note as well are the portals that can influence how quickly you can get there, so make sure you're utilizing this as well. Another thing to point out is the placement of the Lost Knight for who is tanking it. Now in my opinion, there isn't a definitive best placement to where you should pull the Lost Knight, whether pulling it to the portal side or pulling it to the purple side, it kind of depends on the game. However, from my experience, most players usually will check out the Lost Knight from their own blue side, traversing their way through here. So I would recommend to almost always pull it towards portal side, as they need to take an extra few seconds to walk over and try to steal it, which could be enough for you and your team to secure it. Just be mindful that they could all portal in from the red and try to steal it from there. Now when is a good time to try and take the Lost Knight? There are a lot of different scenarios on when it is a good time to take it, but traditionally the best time to go for taking the Lost Knight is when you are getting a kill on the enemy team, or if you know the enemy team will not have enough time to try and steal it. usually if they're backing, for example. You can also sneak it while the enemy team is worried about another teammate too, but overall it all depends on the situation, so make sure if you're planning on taking the Lost Knight that you have some sort of advantage. Tip number 5 is abandoning the tower/Phoenix. Now this tip goes over the cost-benefit analysis of when the enemy team is attacking/sieging your tower or Phoenix. If you're in a situation where one team has an advantage when attacking your tower or Phoenix, let's say the enemy team has one person alive, while your team has the entire team alive and a wave coming into Phoenix. Well, realistically, you're most likely going to lose that Phoenix regardless, unless they are super low, for example, but even then it is still very risky. So instead of going in and trying to defend the Phoenix, and probably dying, you should just give it up and defend your Titan, seeing as they're probably going to take your Phoenix anyways. As you can see in this video, for example, the Rama goes in and immediately dies, and we win the game right after this due to that very mistake. If he had given it up and tried to defend the Titan, he would have most likely been able to defend long enough for his Ganesh to respawn and successfully defend the Titan. And you can see if we go a little bit back in the video, they made a similar mistake twice, when they tried to defend the tower when we had the entire team alive with the wave going into tower, all while the Bellona was one shot. So make sure if you're in a situation where the enemy team has a huge advantage when taking your tower of Phoenix, like I stated earlier, to just give it up. Moving on to tip number 6, we have small wins. Now I talk about this concept a lot, or at least bring it up pretty regularly in my videos. Now let's say for example during a small skirmish that may have not ended up with any kills, pointing out small things like relics used or abilities used can be constituted as small wins. For instance, if you attack someone and you get the relic, whether it's beads or Aegis, this can be considered a small win. With that, backing off of a team fight because you were able to get the relic, a lot of the times is a good thing to do, instead of forcingly continuing the fight and potentially losing. Now of course this depends on the situation, but if you were to continue with this, the next fight/skirmish that happens, you know that they don't have that relic to save them. Other examples could be getting enemies' ults on cooldown, forcing wave on our enemies' towers for them to lose gold, or stealing buff farm that can help you get ahead, especially earlier in the game, right around the level 5 spike. So making sure you tally your small wins will help you analyze the minutiae of the game, which ultimately makes you a far better player. Alright, we have tip number 7, which is counter building. Now if you're super new to the game and don't know what a lot of items do, I would suggest watching some breakdowns of all the items in SMITE 2. I have a sort of out of date meta builds video for Joust going over some of the important items to pay attention to if you'd like to watch that, as a lot of it is still pretty accurate. Now I make this type of video every so often when new updates come out, so watch out for those. But going back into the tip, making sure to counter build the enemy team is incredibly important and downright necessary. And this applies to every role as well, and I'll make sure to point that out when I list out the items. So now I'm going to go over most of the countering you'll encounter in the game. One big thing about Joust is that it has 3 players on each team, which means you'll need to pay attention to the magical versus physical gods you're going up against and build accordingly to that, especially if you're a tank. If they have a lot of magical damage, make sure to buy magical defense items, and vice versa with physical defense. But getting into it, if you go up against teams with heavy healing/lifesteal, so think of gods like Anubis, Hades, Guan Yu, and Ra for example, you need to buy anti-heal. Items like Divine Ruin, Brawler's Rune, Cursed Ankh, Contagion, and Lernian's Bow. If the enemy team has an oppressive ADC or multiple ADCs, items like Leviathans and Nemean Lion are solid items to pay attention to. If they're building into crit, which is currently really strong, then Spectral Armor is what you'll need to buy. And this is specific to tanks. Finally, the last main thing you'll run into is a team with a lot of defense. With this, penetration was what you're going to need to buy. So items like Obsidian Shard, Titan's Bane, Totem of Death, and Executioner are items you'll need to get. Additionally, items like Kins, Soul Reaver are good against enemies building a lot of health, so if you see them building a lot of that, then this will be good. So these are the basics for counter building. For more in-depth analysis, I urge you to go out to my meta builds video and take a look at that. Tip number 8, playing from behind. One of the biggest mistakes I see often is fighting unwinnable fights or fighting with very little odds of winning due to being down significantly in gold and levels. At a certain point, the odds of winning a fight when you're 2 to 3 levels down with the enemy team having an entire item ahead of you is extremely low. Joust is a very snowbally game mode, and with the map not having a lot of farm, it's hard to get back into the game without getting a kill on the enemy team for XP and gold. So making sure if you are down by a lot, you take as little risky fights as you can will help you get back into the game. You'll need to play super carefully and a lot of the time capitalizing on the enemy's mistakes and openings. For example, committing with your team to not engage unless an enemy's ult/relic are down, an enemy mispositions, or you just simply have clean numbers advantage. The higher the skill of the lobbies will make this harder, but the general idea applies. If you're down 3 levels, for example, you're going to have a huge disadvantage. So waiting by your tower/phoenix/titan and capitalizing on their potential mistakes, or if you outplay them, is really your only options. And even with all that, you still may not be able to get back into the game, but taking unneeded risky fights with very little chance of winning is a sure way to secure a loss. Alright, calling back to tip number 4 with the Lost Knight, we have tip number 9, Lost Knight mechanics. Now the Lost Knight in SMITE 2 works differently than the Bull Demon King in SMITE 1. One big change is its ability to affect the Titan now. The Lost Knight still disables whatever current tower is up, however, it can now debuff the Titan by disabling the healing, reducing the power and protections by 75%, as well as the attack speed by 50%. On top of that, it grants your team a buff, healing and restoring 0.8% of your health and mana every second, and giving you plus 15% penetration. So there are a lot of similar effects, but some differences with it now affecting Titan. For example, in SMITE 1, if you got Bull Demon, it would disable the Phoenix as it came up. So a strategy in SMITE 1 was to get the Bull Demon King right before the Phoenix came up, so you can go right into it and it would be disabled. However, in SMITE 2, if you get the Lost Knight before the Phoenix comes up, it'll affect the Titan, and the Phoenix will come up fully operational. So making sure you understand this can help you figure out whether you want to wait for the Phoenix to fully come up before doing the Lost Knight to make sure the Phoenix is the one that gets disabled rather than the Titan. Alright, finally we have tip number 10, which is the level 5 power spike. Level 5 is a huge spike, and making sure to either capitalize on this or be wary of this will help with who gets first blood and takes the edge from the start of the game. I can't tell you how many times I've had to learn this the hard way when I try to fight the enemy team as they all get level 5 and I'm still level 4, and I still am guilty of this to this day. Who would have thought that a team with their ults would have a huge advantage? But analyzing the XP gathered by both teams will help you make an assessment on who will get 5 first. For example, if the enemy team got 3 of the 4 buffs, then you can reasonably assume they'll get 5 before you. So if you're the team who gets 5 first, you have the advantage of playing more aggressively. If not, make sure to wait to get some XP and get 5 before making any plays, generally speaking. Alright, now that wraps up the 10 tips for Joust to help you win more games in SMITE 2. I hope this video helped you out whether you're totally new or just jumping back into the game. If you found it useful or just enjoyed it, let me know in the comment section down below. I've got plenty more tips I could share, so if you'd like to see a part 2, I'm all ears. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, it helps a ton. I also stream on Twitch every Friday through Sunday, so feel free to come and hang out. If you want to support the channel further, memberships are open at 99 cents a month and $2.99 a month. Now of course, this is never expected, but always appreciated. Discord link is in the description down below, but that is everything that I have for you. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching.